The first thing you learn when you're cast out of a pack isn't how to hunt. It's how to be hunted. My name is Kael, and for 3 long, grueling years, I have been a rogue, a wolf without a name, a home, or a future. In the territory of the Iron Fang, being a rogue is more than just a social stigma. It is a capital offense punishable by a slow, agonizing death. Alpha Thorne doesn't just exile those he deems a threat. He plays a game he calls the death run. He gives you a 10-minute head start, a mockery of mercy, before he sends his elite trackers to collect your head as a trophy for his private haul. I was framed for a betrayal I didn't commit, accused of selling pack secrets to the Silver Order, stripped of my rank as a lead guardian, and thrown into the stretch of jagged cliffs and dense forest that served as the pack's private slaughterhouse. Most rogues last an hour before they are cornered and torn apart. The lucky ones last 2. I've been running for 6 days, and as I crouched in the freezing mud of the Blackwood Ridge, I realized I was done being the prey. The air was biting tonight, a sharp, metallic cold that felt like needles in my lungs, and it was thick with the scent of an impending storm. But I could smell them over the rain. 3 trackers, moving in a tactical V formation about half a mile behind me. I knew their scents by heart. Garrick, the muscle, Mira, the shadow, and Harlan, the one who took pleasure in the chase. They were arrogant. They were making too much noise, snapping twigs and huffing with the exertion of the climb because they thought I was spent. They thought I was just another starving animal ready to curl up and wait for the end. They didn't know that for the last 48 hours I hadn't been running away. I had been turning this ridge into a graveyard. I paused at the edge of the Crimson Ravine, my breath coming in short, controlled bursts to avoid leaving a trail of steam in the cold air. I didn't shift into my wolf form, even though my bones ached for the strength of the change. Shifting makes you fast and powerful, but it also makes you loud, heavy, and governed by instinct. In a survival situation against a pack, your human brain, your ability to plan, to trap, and to deceive, is your most lethal weapon. I reached into my scavenged leather satchel and pulled out a bundle of wild hemlock and nightshade I'd spent the afternoon crushing into a toxic paste. My hands were stained dark and my fingers were numb, but I smeared the poison over the jagged rocks of the only narrow pass leading up the ridge. It was a cruel trick. If they touched it with open wounds from the brush, or even got the dust of it in their eyes during the heat of a shift, the paralysis would set in within seconds, turning their own strength against them. This wasn't honor fighting. This wasn't a duel in the pack circle. This was the raw, ugly reality of survival. I heard a low, bird-like whistle to my left. The signal. They were closing the gap. I didn't run. Instead, I stepped into the hollow of a lightning-struck oak tree and slowed my heartbeat, in a technique I'd learned from a rogue elder years ago, until I was almost a part of the wood itself. The first tracker, Garrick, burst into the clearing. He was a massive brute, already half-shifted, with his jaw elongated, and his eyes a frantic, bloodshot orange. He stopped, sniffing the air, his nose twitching just inches from my hiding spot. He smelled the hemlock, but his arrogant mind mistook it for the natural rot of the forest. He stepped forward, his heavy boot landing right on the tripwire I'd woven from dried deer sinew and sharpened pine stakes. The trap didn't kill him, but it did exactly what I needed. It screamed for me. The stakes drove into his calf, and his roar of pain echoed across the ravine, acting as a beacon that signaled his location to the other 2. I stepped out from the shadows, not with claws, but with a heavy piece of flint I'd sharpened into a jagged wedge. Garrick looked at me, surprise flickering in his eyes before he could even let out a snarl. I didn't give him the chance to recover or call for help. I slammed the wedge into the pressure point at the base of his skull, and the massive warrior went limp instantly. 1 down, 2 to go. The forest seemed to grow darker as the storm clouds finally blotted out the last of the moonlight. I knew Mira was the real threat. She was the best scout in the Iron Fang, a shadow who killed before you ever knew she was there. She would have heard Garrick's fall, and she would be circling, looking for the angle I hadn't covered. I could feel her eyes on me, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I didn't wait for her to strike. I dove over the edge of the ravine, sliding down the muddy embankment into the darkness of the lower forest, the thorns tearing at my skin. Behind me, I heard a howl that made the very ground tremble. It wasn't the trackers. It was Alpha Thorne. He had finally lost patience with his pets and joined the hunt himself. He was tired of waiting for my head to be delivered. He wanted to take it with his own teeth. I hit the bottom of the slope, my shoulders screaming in protest as I rolled into the icy waters of the Blackwood Creek. The water was a death sentence for most, but for me, it was a cloak. It would mask my scent, but it would also drain my body heat in minutes if I stayed too long. I waded through the current, keeping my head low, moving toward the dead zone, an area where the forest floor was covered in a thick layer of deceptively beautiful moss that concealed deep, these ancient sinkholes and limestone pits. This was where I had planned my final stand. I climbed out of the water, my teeth chattering so hard I feared they might break, and began to circle back toward my own trail. I needed them to follow the blood. I left a deliberate trail from a shallow cut on my palm, leading directly over a patch of moss that looked like solid ground, but hid a 20-foot drop into a dark cavern. I heard the sound of heavy paws hitting the dirt. 2 sets. Mira and the Alpha. They were moving in perfect sync now. The silence of true apex predators. Thorne's voice suddenly boomed through the trees, a psychological tactic used to break the will of a rogue. You were a good soldier, Kael. You were like a son to me. Why die like a dog in the dirt? Come out, and I'll give you a warrior's death. I'll make it quick. I stayed silent, my fingers digging into the cold mud as I lay flat against the earth. I wasn't a soldier anymore, and I certainly wasn't his son. I was the ghost he had created. Mira was the first to reach the edge of the dead zone. She was cautious, her movements fluid and precise, her nose tracking the scent of my blood with deadly accuracy. She saw the weakened figure leaning against the tree at the edge of the drop, my old cloak stuffed with brush and leaves, positioned to look like a man at the end of his strength. As she leaped for the killing blow, her weight hit the moss. The earth gave way with a sickening, wet crunch. She didn't scream. She was too professional for that, too dedicated to the hunt. But the sound of her body hitting the jagged stone floor of the cavern below was unmistakable. Now, it was just me and the man who had destroyed my life. Thorne stepped into the clearing, his massive form silhouetted against the dark sky, the first cracks of lightning illuminating his face. He didn't shift. He wanted to look me in the eye when he did it. He wanted to feel my life depart under his bare hands. Impressive, he said, his voice dripping with a cold, predatory respect that turned my stomach. You've killed my best. You've used the land like a weapon. But traps won't save you from me, Kael. I am the mountain. He lunged with a speed that defied his massive frame. I tried to move, but the days of hunger and cold had slowed my reflexes. His fist caught me in the ribs, the sound of breaking bone echoing in my own ears as I was sent flying backward into the dirt. I felt a lung begin to collapse, the world spinning in nauseating shades of gray and red. He stood over me, a shadow of death, his hand reaching for my throat. Any last words for the pack you betrayed? Any prayers to the moon? I looked up at him, blood bubbling at the corner of my mouth, and I did something he didn't expect. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of defeat or madness. It was the smile of a man who had planned 3 moves ahead while his opponent was still playing a game of checkers. I didn't betray the pack, Thorne, I wheezed, my voice barely a whisper. I just moved the border. I reached out with my last bit of strength and pulled a hidden vine I'd buried deep in the mud beneath me. Above us, the storm finally broke in a violent downpour, and with the pull of that vine, the massive pile of loose boulders and timber I'd spent 2 days bracing with a single, This weakened log gave way. The landslide was instantaneous, a roar of earth and stone that drowned out even the thunder. Thorne had just enough time to look up, his eyes widening with the realization that he had walked into the biggest trap of all, before the mountain reclaimed its own. I rolled into the small, narrow crevice I'd scouted on day 3, the only safe spot in the entire clearing. The roar of the falling rock was deafening, a symphony of destruction that felt like the earth itself was purging the Iron Fang's rot. When the dust and debris finally settled, the clearing was gone. The Alpha was gone. The hunt was over. I crawled out from the crevice, my body broken, my ribs a mess of pain, and my spirit exhausted beyond measure. But I was still breathing. I looked toward the horizon, where the first gray light of a new day was beginning to break through the dissipating storm clouds. I was still a rogue. I still had no home, no name, and no pack. But for the first time in 6 days, I wasn't being hunted. Every step after that felt like a lifetime. I dragged my shattered body through the frost-covered ferns, the adrenaline that had sustained me now replaced by a crushing, hollow fatigue. I found a hollowed-out log near the base of a weeping willow, and I crawled inside, letting the darkness take me. I dreamed of the day I was exiled, the way the pack elders had looked at me with pity, and the way the younger wolves had snarled with a newfound manufactured hatred. It was all a lie. Thorne had wanted me gone because I saw the corruption in his leadership, of the way he was trading our territory for silver to line his own pockets. He turned the pack against me because I was the only one who dared to ask why our brothers were disappearing in the night. I woke 3 days later to the sound of a crow pecking at the bark of my log. My fever had broken, but the hunger was a physical weight in my stomach. I spent the next week living like an animal, eating grubs and scavenged berries, my human mind slowly stitching itself back together along with my broken ribs. I learned to move without making a sound, to read the messages left by other animals in the dirt. I was becoming something more than a wolf and more than a man. I was becoming a part of the forest itself. One afternoon, while I was drinking from a hidden spring, I saw a reflection in the water that wasn't mine. It was a girl. She's no older than 19, her eyes wide with terror and her clothes in tatters. She was a rogue, too. I could smell the scent of the silver moon pack on her, a pack known for its cruelty to its omegas. She didn't see me at first, but when I stepped out from the shadows, she scrambled back, her hands reaching for a rock. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, my voice sounding like gravel after so much silence. She didn't believe me. Why should she? In this world, a lone male was almost always a threat. "You're from the Silver Moon," I noted, sitting down a respectful distance away. "They don't let their omegas leave alive. How did you get past the border guards?" She narrowed her eyes, her grip on the rock tightening. "I didn't get past them. I ran through them. They killed my brother. I have nothing left." Her story was different from mine, but the pain was the same. I shared my meager supply of smoked fish with her, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of something other than survival. I felt a purpose. Her name was Selah, and she became the first member of what would eventually become the Shadow Pack. We traveled together for months, staying in the unclaimed gray zones between the major pack territories. We found others like us, the discarded, the broken, the ones who had seen the true face of the Alphas, and survived. I taught them the traps I had used against Garrick and Mira. I taught them how to fight as a unit, not through brute force, but through coordination and environment. We became a rumor in the forest, a group of ghost wolves that couldn't be caught. The Alphas began to panic. They didn't understand how a group of rogues could be so organized. They thought it was a revolution. In a way, it was. We weren't fighting for land. We were fighting for the right to exist outside their system. As our numbers grew, so did our legend. We weren't just a band of outcasts anymore. We were a society. We built dwellings in the high eaves of the red-leaf maples, accessible only to those who knew the secret paths. We established a trade network with the independent human settlements that bordered the forest, exchanging rare herbs and furs for the supplies we couldn't produce ourselves. We created a code of honor that was based on contribution and character, not on the circumstances of one's birth or the strength of one's wolf. Sella proved to be a natural leader, her compassion tempered by the trauma she had endured. She became the heart of the Shadow Pack, the one who reminded us that we were fighting for more than just survival. The climax came a year after my run on Blackwood Ridge. A coalition of 3 packs, led by the remnants of the Iron Fang, who still sought revenge for Thorne, tracked us to our camp in the Misty Valleys. They brought 50 warriors, the finest the packs had to offer. They were armed with silver-edged weapons and tactical gear, their eyes fixed on the prize of our annihilation. We had 12 warriors, most of them formerly considered weak or useless by their old packs. But we had the valley, and we had the night. And most importantly, we had the truth. I stood at the top of the ridge, looking down at the torches of the men I used to call brothers. They thought they were coming for a slaughter, a simple exercise in pest control. They didn't realize that I had spent the last year perfecting the very art that had saved my life on the death run. As they entered the valley, the earth began to move. We had spent weeks rigging the slopes with the same landslide triggers I had used against Thorne, only this time they were more precise. We didn't need to bite them. We just needed to let the mountain do the work. The first wave of warriors was swallowed by a wall of stone and timber before they could even draw their swords. The second wave, panicked and disoriented, fell into the pits we had concealed beneath the forest floor. The battle was short, brutal, and decisive. When the dust settled, the coalition was broken, and the Alphas were forced to flee back to their territories, their legends of superiority shattered. I stood on the battlefield, on the moon full and bright above us, and I realized that the betrayal Thorne had accused me of was the greatest gift I had ever received. It had forced me to find the strength I didn't know I had, and it had led me to the people who truly mattered. I wasn't Kael the lead guardian anymore. I wasn't Kael the rogue. I was Kael, the first of the Shadow Pack. In the years that followed, the Shadow Pack became a permanent fixture in the Great Forest. We weren't just a rumor anymore. We were a reality. We became the guardians of the gray zones, the ones who ensured that no one else would ever have to face the death run alone. We welcomed anyone who was willing to work and willing to respect our code, regardless of their past. We built schools for the children, infirmaries for the sick, and a council house where every voice was heard. And we showed the world that there was another way to live, a way that didn't involve the constant cycle of violence and dominance that had defined the packs for generations. I eventually stepped down from my role as leader, handing the responsibility over to Sella and a new generation of outcasts. I spent my final days in the cave where I had first found refuge after the landslide, watching the seasons change and the forest grow. I was often visited by the young wolves of the Shadow Pack, who would listen with wide eyes as I told them the story of the day I moved the border. I told them about Garrick and Mira, about Thorne and the landslide, but most of all, I told them about the importance of being true to oneself, even when the whole world is trying to tell you who to be. I told them that the greatest strength is not the power to destroy, but the courage to survive and the compassion to help others do the same. As I lay on my deathbed, looking out at the sunset over Blackwood Ridge, I felt a sense of peace I had never known as a guardian of the Iron Fang. I had lived a long, difficult life, but it was a life of my own making. I had turned a death sentence into a legacy, and I had left the world a better place than I found it. The moon was rising now, a thin silver sliver in the darkening sky. I closed my eyes, the sound of the forest breathing around me, and I knew that the hunt was finally over. I wasn't running anymore. I was home. The Shadow Pack would live on, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest night, there is always a path to freedom, and I would be part of that forest forever, a ghost who had finally found his way back to the light.